Welcome back to the channel. Welcome here to Abek, Afghanistan. I'm ready to leave, but before I leave Abek, I'm going to visit one place, which is actually the whole reason why I came to this town.
Most travel stories begin with a postcard fantasy filled with open roads, endless horizons, and a smiling rider chasing freedom. This one doesn't. It begins with silence. With hotel rooms that feel too small after deserts that felt infinite. With the weight of riding thousands of miles, only to realize that distance doesn't always outrun heartbreak. Noraly Schoenmaker didn't set out to become itchy boots to inspire millions. She set out to survive something that quietly shattered her world. Behind the helmet, the engine noise, and the fearless crossings, is a woman who kept moving because stopping meant facing the pain she couldn't yet name. This isn't a story about a motorcycle. It's about what happens when the road becomes the only place left to heal. To the world, Noraly Schoenmaker looks unbreakable. A lone rider carving through deserts, jungles, and frozen mountain passes.
Welcome to Osh in Kyrgyzstan. And I've spent quite some time here working on my computer.
Her voice was calm, her hands steady, and her eyes focused behind the visor. Millions know her as Itchy Boots, the woman who goes where maps fade and comfort ends, but that image is only half the story, and maybe not even the most important half, because courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it looks like getting up when staying down would hurt less. Sometimes it looks like choosing motion because stillness feels unbearable.
I will show you what the plan is. So I'm now here in Springbok. So I'll first ride over the highway, right here to the border.
Behind every clip of border crossings and mechanical breakdowns is a quieter reality. The camera doesn't linger on. Long nights when the engine finally shuts off and the silence rushes in. Hotel rooms that feel temporary in the wrong ways, that are just lonely and empty. The strange contradiction of being admired by millions while feeling profoundly alone. This isn't a story about viral travel content or extreme adventure. It's about the emotional cost of becoming the person everyone else needs you to be when you're still trying to figure out who you are. It's about heartbreak that doesn't announce itself loudly, but settles in slowly, reshaping decisions, identities, and futures. She didn't set out to become a symbol of freedom. She didn't plan to inspire people trapped in offices, relationships, or lives that feel too small. What she did was far more important. She tried to survive a moment that quietly dismantled everything she thought her life would be. In that moment, the road didn't promise happiness. It only promised a road for her to keep running forward. And sometimes, that's enough to keep someone alive. Before the helmet, before the channel, before strangers recognized her in distant countries, Noraly lived a life that made sense on paper. Before Itchy Boots, the life she didn't plan to lose. Her life has always been structured, predictable, and safe. She wasn't born chasing danger or dreaming of endless roads. Her early life followed a familiar rhythm, moving from education, career ambitions, to long-term plans that pointed toward stability rather than uncertainty. She worked in a professional field that demanded precision and discipline. The kind of life where success is measured in milestones, not miles. There was comfort in knowing what tomorrow would look like. A future that unfolded logically, relationships deepening, careers advancing, roots growing instead of drifting, and for a time, that life felt right. Unfortunately, comfort can be deceptive. Sometimes it dulls rather than fulfills. Beneath the routines and expectations, something subtle began to fracture. At first, not noticeable all at once, just enough to create a quiet unease, the sense that the life she was building no longer fit the person she was becoming. Then came the break. The kind that doesn't just hurt, but actively redefines everything. A personal loss that stripped away certainty and replaced it with questions she wasn't ready to answer. Suddenly, the future she had been walking toward simply disappeared. Plans dissolved. Trust shifted. Identity cracked. When something foundational collapses, staying in the same place can feel suffocating. Every familiar street becomes a reminder. Every routine echoes with what's missing. For Noraly, the life she once trusted began to feel like a room she could no longer breathe in. So she did something unexpected, and it was not impulsive in the way people imagined. She chose distance not from responsibility, but from pain. She chose a motorcycle not because she wanted to be fearless, but because it gave her control when everything else felt uncontrollable. One road at a time, one decision at a time, one day that only required her to keep going. This wasn't a quest for adventure. It was an act of self-preservation.
So I want to go and see one more thing before I head back out of Nubra Valley. So I'm gonna see that, and by that time hopefully I'll see somewhere that is open.
The irony is that the version of her the world would later celebrate for her resilience, independence, and seemingly unstoppable strength was forged in one of the most fragile moments of her life. Before Itchy Boots existed, there was simply a woman trying to outrun the collapse of the future she once believed in, and she had no idea that by leaving it behind, she was about to build something entirely different. Something visible to millions, but deeply shaped by heartbreak. So, what threatened to break her down so completely? The break that changed everything. At the center of Noraly's journey is a personal turning point that has been discussed publicly by her but never sensationalized. A major relationship ended, and with it, the future she had been building. This wasn't a fleeting breakup or a minor detour in life. It was a long-term relationship coming to a close. One serious enough that it had shaped her expectations for stability, partnership, and what came next. The ending didn't just change her emotional state. It altered the structure of her life. In interviews and conversations over time, she has been clear about one thing. The breakup forced her to reassess everything: where she lived, what she wanted, and who she was becoming. The plans that once felt solid were suddenly gone, and the life she had been moving toward no longer existed in the same form. This kind of loss doesn't arrive with drama or spectacle. It arrives quietly, in the small moments where routines no longer make sense, in decisions that suddenly feel hollow, in the realization that staying where you are means constantly confronting what's no longer there. For her, continuing along the same path professionally and personally no longer felt possible. Not because she failed, but because the context had changed. The version of her life that supported that structure was gone. Rather than rushing into another plan or forcing herself back into familiarity, she chose space, time, and distance. She had already been interested in motorcycles and travel, but now that interest became something more deliberate. Riding offered a sense of freedom at a moment when so much felt out of her control. It required focus, presence, and immediate decision-making. There was no room for overthinking the past when the road demanded attention. Importantly, this decision wasn't framed as a grand escape or a permanent reinvention. It was temporary and practical, a way to step outside her circumstances and regain balance. She has stated that the journey was never meant to turn into a career or a public platform. It was simply a way to move forward when standing still felt impossible. What changed everything was not just the ride itself, but what it represented. The motorcycle became a boundary between her and a life that no longer fit. Each mile created breathing room. Each border crossed reinforced the idea that she could rebuild on her own terms. This was the moment where motion replaced certainty, not as a solution, but as a coping mechanism. While the heartbreak wasn't erased by distance, the journey gave her something essential in its aftermath: the ability to function again, to think clearly, to begin redefining herself outside of what had been lost. The world would eventually see this period as the birth of something inspiring, but at the time, it was simply a response to grief. After the breakup, what he needed most wasn't adrenaline or attention, it was distance. Not distance in the sense of running away, but space to think without constant reminders of what had changed. Home had become emotionally crowded. Familiar places carried associations that made healing slower, not faster. Motorcycle travel offered something specific and practical. Each day had a clear goal: ride, navigate, refuel, and rest. Decisions were immediate and tangible: where to sleep, which road to take, and when to stop. That simplicity mattered. Unlike other forms of travel, solo motorcycle riding doesn't encourage constant interaction. There are long stretches without conversation, without expectation. That isolation wasn't something to be feared. It allowed her to process emotions privately, without having to explain them or perform resilience for others. She has spoken about how movement helped regulate her thoughts. When the body is engaged, the mind often follows. The road felt safer than home because it asked less of her emotionally. It didn't demand explanations or answers. It's no wonder that people romanticize her early travels. Becoming itchy boots, accidentally public, intentionally honest. When Noraly began documenting her travels, it wasn't part of a carefully planned career move or a bid for online recognition. The decision to film was practical. Recording routes, conditions, and experiences served as a personal archive, a way to remember where she had been and what she had learned along the way. Sharing those videos publicly came later, almost as an afterthought. The channel name Itchy Boots reflected restlessness rather than branding. It captured the feeling of needing to move, of not being able to stay in one place for too long. At the time, there was no expectation that anyone beyond a small audience would be watching. The early videos were straightforward, minimally edited, and focused on the journey itself, rather than on the person behind the camera. As viewership slowly grew, something unexpected happened. People connected not just to the landscapes or the mechanics of motorcycle travel, but to the calm, measured way she approached challenges. There was no exaggerated drama, no manufactured tension. When problems like breakdowns, difficult terrain, or border complications arose, they were handled methodically. That authenticity stood out. What viewers didn't see was that this composure wasn't a performance. It was a necessity. Staying calm wasn't about appearing fearless. It was about functioning. Emotional restraint on camera mirrored how she was managing her personal life at the time by focusing on what was directly in front of her and setting aside what couldn't be fixed in that moment. As the audience expanded, so did the pressure. Filming became part of the routine. There were expectations, even if they were unspoken. Consistency, reliability, the quiet strength people had come to admire. Balancing those expectations while still traveling solo added another layer of responsibility to an already demanding lifestyle. Despite this, she resisted turning the channel into something overly personal. Details about her private life remained limited, and intentionally so. The content stayed grounded in the journey rather than emotional exposition. The road had been chosen as a place to process things privately, and that line was carefully maintained. The paradox of Itchy Boots is that while it became a source of motivation and comfort for countless viewers, it was never designed to be inspirational. It was documentation, not declaration. The honesty came from what wasn't embellished: the fatigue, the uncertainty, the imperfect days that were allowed to exist without explanation. By the time the channel became widely recognized, the journey had already done much of its quiet work. What the audience witnessed was resilience in motion, but what powered it was far more understated: consistency, self-reliance, and a deliberate refusal to turn personal pain into spectacle. What began as a private coping mechanism had become public not because it was engineered that way, but because honesty, when left untouched, tends to resonate. The loneliness no one talks about. As the journey stretched from weeks into months and then into years, one reality became impossible to ignore. Long-term solo travel is isolating in ways that aren't immediately obvious. While viewers saw constant movement and changing scenery, much of daily life on the road was repetitive and quiet. Most days followed a simple pattern of riding alone for hours, navigating unfamiliar places, finding fuel, food, and somewhere to sleep. Human interaction was often brief and functional: a few words at a border crossing, a short conversation at a roadside stop, then back to solitude. This kind of isolation is manageable in short bursts. Over time, it becomes something else entirely. She has openly acknowledged that solo travel comes with emotional costs. There are evenings when the ride is over and there's no one to talk to about the day. No shared processing of close calls or small victories. Online visibility complicated this further. As the channel grew, so did public engagement. Messages, comments, and recognition became part of the experience. Yet this didn't replace real companionship. Digital connection lacks physical presence and emotional reciprocity. Being known by many people is not the same as being known deeply by a few. There was also the pressure of consistency. Even on difficult days, filming didn't stop simply because motivation dipped. Travel schedules, visas, and logistics don't pause for burnout. Pushing through became routine. Importantly, this loneliness wasn't framed as a tragedy. It was simply part of the reality she chose. Independence brought freedom, but it also removed safety nets. Every problem had to be solved alone. Every doubt had to be managed internally. Over time, that self-reliance can be both empowering and draining. She has spoken about moments when the solitude felt heavy, particularly after long rides or during extended stays in places where language and culture created additional barriers. These weren't moments of crisis, but of quiet fatigue, the kind that doesn't demand attention, but slowly wears on you. What viewers often miss is that strength doesn't eliminate loneliness. It just allows someone to function alongside it. The calm presence seen on screen was not the absence of emotional weight, but the ability to carry it without letting it interfere with immediate needs. This section of her journey shows an uncomfortable truth, and that is, freedom and isolation often exist side by side. Choosing one doesn't mean escaping the other, and for all the distance covered and obstacles overcome, the most persistent challenge wasn't terrain or weather. It was learning how to live with prolonged solitude without letting it define her. The road continued to move forward. Internally, the work was slower. By the time Noraly's journey was firmly established, a clear narrative had formed around her public image. She was widely seen as fearless, self-sufficient, and exceptionally strong. While those traits weren't inaccurate, they were incomplete. She has been open about experiencing fear on the road. Mechanical failures in remote areas, unpredictable traffic conditions, illness far from familiar systems, and the inherent risks of solo riding were all part of daily life. These weren't exaggerated dangers, but realistic ones that required constant assessment and preparation. Independence meant there was no immediate backup. If something went wrong, she was responsible for managing it. That responsibility sharpened decision-making, but it also increased cognitive load. Every choice carried consequences, and mistakes couldn't be deferred to someone else. Over time, self-reliance became both a strength and a limitation. The more capable she became, the harder it was to imagine operating any other way. Accepting help when available sometimes conflicted with the independence she had built. There was also the unspoken expectation to remain composed. Viewers admired her calm demeanor, and while she never explicitly leaned into that role, it existed. The absence of visible panic became part of the channel's consistency. Internally, that meant regulating fear rather than eliminating it. This regulation came at a cost. Continually managing risk, uncertainty, and emotional restraint is mentally demanding. The strength people recognized was often the result of sustained effort rather than natural ease. Importantly, she never framed herself as invulnerable. In moments where she discussed challenges, the emphasis was on preparation, caution, and realism. The cost of independence isn't always visible. It shows up in fatigue, in reduced emotional bandwidth, in the gradual narrowing of one's comfort zone to only what can be managed alone. These weren't failures, they were trade-offs. As her journey continued, it became increasingly clear that independence had helped her rebuild after loss, but it wasn't a permanent solution to everything that had been disrupted. Strength had carried her forward. The road had taught her how capable she was, and perhaps even inspired her fans to find their own strength and freedom, no matter the circumstances that surround them. Noraly's life lately. Recently, Noraly Schoenmaker has been balancing life both on and off the road. In 2025, she released her first memoir, Free Ride, published in Dutch and English, which documents her early solo travels and the personal upheaval that led her to motorcycle life. Much of the year has included book promotion across Europe and appearances at major adventure motorcycling events, such as the UK's ABR Festival, where she's spoken about long-distance riding, safety, and independence. While in the UK, she made headlines after an attempted theft of a loaned Yamaha Tenere 700 in Wales, which was ultimately recovered thanks to a tracker. She also canceled a planned US book tour, publicly citing concerns around immigration policies and travel complications. Beyond events and promotion, she has returned to active travel and filming, with recent reports placing her back in Central Asia, including Tajikistan, continuing new episodes of her Itchy Boots journey while maintaining a deliberately measured pace that now prioritizes sustainability over constant movement. She definitely lost something at the start of her journey, but it led her into finding something more, something freeing, which has exposed her to the wider world. What are your thoughts on her life? Tell us in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Please leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this.